Hi, everyone. I'm Alfie. I'm here with SASA today, and for Destination Ancient, SASA's new live streaming project focused on bringing the ancient world into the comfort of your own home, whether it's due to travel restrictions, cost, time, or any other barriers that are keeping you from traveling currently. This is a place for you to explore both modern and ancient sites, museums, and more. We're here for you. So please send any questions or comments in the chat, and we will answer them as often as we can. If you'd like what you see from SASA, please consider becoming a recurring donor for as little as $3 a month, less than the price of a cup of coffee. You can help us save ancient studies. Today, we're very, very happy to be exploring Hyde Abbey, a medieval Benedictine monastery just outside the walls of Winchester in Hampshire, England. Showing around this site today is Dr. Lillian Gonzalez from Travelusion Tours, one of SASA's Point Ancient partners. We're very grateful to have you today, Lillian. Thank you so much for everything. And without further ado, please go on with the tour.
Am I good to go?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. Well, yes. Hi. Please drop the formalities. I'm Lily from now on. I really don't like using big pedantic historian names, and my name is really long because I'm Spanish. So Lily for everyone. And yes, we're here in Hyde Abbey. I'm about to flip the camera just so I can show you things, but just very quickly so you all can understand what we're doing today. Hyde Abbey is pretty much in ruins, and the site is kind of broken into 3 different parts. So I'm actually going to take you guys from one part to the other. Apologies because, like I said, it is in ruins and there is not much to see. But this is also one of the reasons why I really wanted to showcase this monument because, you know, like ancient studies overall, lots of sites, not just in the UK, but in the whole world are actually being lost to the fact that people just don't care about them. So it's something that I'm going to talk about in the tour today. But without further ado, let me flip my camera and show you what is left. So this beautiful church that we have in here is St. Bartholomew's Parish Church. That means that it's actually just a communal church. It's not a big church, it's not a cathedral, nothing like that. This is just literally a neighborhood church. And it's one of the 2 buildings that remain here in Hyde Abbey. Now, like we've already said, Hyde Abbey was literally just a Benedictine monastery, or abbey in this case, that was moved to the outskirts of Winchester. But originally, the actual abbey itself used to be located in the city center. That is because its foundation was promoted by the Anglo-Saxon kings, King Alfred and his son Edward. But later on, as Winchester developed as a city, well, later kings and patrons decided that it was kind of in the way. So they took it to a place that actually was pretty empty. This whole area, I mean, I'm sure you very quickly where we are. It's a very quiet neighborhood. But all of these were just meadows. And the river is just down the road from here. I'll show you as we walk down. So they took it here. And one of the great things about bringing Hyde Abbey over to this side of Winchester was that they could make it a lot bigger. We're literally on the edge of what the actual abbey used to be. And they did it in a new style. Now, the reason for this is because in 1066, as you probably know, the Normans conquered England. And as part of their Normanization campaign, that essentially means making sure that everyone supports the new king instead of the old Saxon rulers, they decided to make lots of new buildings, including churches, to ensure that people knew who was in charge, essentially. It was just political propaganda. So by taking Hyde Abbey from the city center of Winchester, where they were building a brand new cathedral, and taking it over here, they were sending 2 messages. The cathedral was Norman, and this new abbey, although still containing all of the inheritance of the Anglo-Saxon kings, it was also Norman. Now, this church of St. Bartholomew's actually comes into the story of Hyde Abbey a lot later. It was not originally part of the Benedictine complex itself, but as time goes on, they decided that it would have been very convenient for the congregation, for the visitors, and for everyone else involved to have a parish church here. Now, the actual tower that you see there that we've walked by is a lot later built than the rest of the church itself. The tower dates from about the late 1500s, while the actual rest of the church is from the later Middle Ages. And that relates to the story of Hyde Abbey itself and why we don't have a lot left of it. So first of all, about the Abbey more specifically, we don't actually know an awful lot about it, other than the fact that it was an important Benedictine monastery when they bring it here, that had lots of relics, and that therefore was super crucial in the pilgrim route connecting Winchester to Canterbury. Now, for those of you who may not be from the UK and who may not be aware with the history of the area, Winchester and Canterbury were like the two main focal points of religious worship in the UK, in the south at least. We also had York in the north. Let's not forget about York. But that's the reason why having a place for the pilgrims to connect those two cities was super important. Now, one of the other things that they also did when they brought the abbey here was bring with them not just the relics, but everyone that was buried there, including King Alfred, his wife Elwitha or Elwith, and their son Edward. Problem: we don't really know where they're buried. And this was a huge site. Now, I don't know if you are familiar, guys, but a few years back, we had a huge movement here trying to find the grave of Richard III, which we did in a car park. And efforts were done to try and find King Alfred, because we knew he was buried here in Hyde Abbey. We just didn't really know where. Well, this grave actually became quite a main player in this archaeological excavation that took place in 2013. Unfortunately, none of the remains that were found here correlate to the Anglo-Saxon period. They're a lot later, from the 12th and 15th century. However, that goes to say that although we didn't find King Alfred, which would have been great, but although we didn't find him, it shows that this was still a very important place of worship in the later Middle Ages. And it really shows that that Norman propaganda to try and get, people to understand who was really in charge, no matter who was in charge before, really worked. But that is the famous grave that they dug up and where they thought King Alfred may have been. We don't even know really who was buried in that grave specifically, because unfortunately, what happens when we move things like this around is that the bones from many different people end up all together in one mass grave. So identifying the individuals becomes a hard task for archaeologists. But at least they were able to carbon date them to the 12th to the 15th century, that sort of range period, which is, considering how these things go, is as good as we can hope for. So that is kind of the story of this part of the complex. Now I'll show you the church itself from over here. So as you can see, it's not a very small parish church, it's actually rather large. Now going back to the tower itself, the reason why there is no more Hyde Abbey is because during the reign of Henry VIII, he issued an order that was the dissolution of the monasteries. Now, for those of you who may not know, Henry VIII actually reformed the church in England. And as part of this reformation, he didn't really agree with a lot of the monastic rules. And he had a very specific way of seeing religion. And that gets him, in war with the Pope and several other people, and also with one of his wives, poor Catherine. And as part of that, he actually commissions the demolition of all of these monastic buildings. So Hyde Abbey, despite having been a huge, important place of worship for many, many years, just literally is laid to ruins. Now, if you paid attention, and if not, I'll move you a little bit closer, you may be able to see that the stonework on the tower is a little bit different from the church itself. And it's because the stone on that tower was repurposed from the actual ruins of Hyde Abbey Cathedral, Abbey in general. It's not what a normal church from the period that St. Bartholomew's dates from would have. Not this slate, not that sort of square shape, but it would have made sense for the congregation to have a place like that after the abbey was actually destroyed. And a lot of the abbey was completely like forgotten. All of this area that you guys are seeing would have been part of the abbey and more. Like I said, we're literally on the edge of the complex. But it wasn't really until the 18th century that they rediscovered this area, because they decided that they wanted to make a new prison here in Winchester. At the time, we already had 3 prisons in Winchester, so apparently another one was required. They sent some prisoners here to actually start digging things up and preparing the grounds. And little did they know that suddenly, boom, it's a whole Benedictine complex underneath there. But, well, because of urban redevelopment and whatnot, they didn't really resurface a lot of this stuff. The only other building that remains is this one. Now, this is literally known as Hyde Gate. And the function of this building is very clear for us. And we have records, and it's actually one of the best documented buildings overall that we know of, because this would have been the entrance to the Benedictine complex for visitors and pilgrims. So imagine that you were on your way to Canterbury or anywhere else, and normally it was the Benedictine rule that anyone that would come to your house would receive lodgings and you would take care of them, right? So this would have been the place where you would have literally just gone in, as we're gonna do, and a lovely Benedictine monk would have asked you how you were, who you were, and how they could help you. Now, unfortunately, as you can see, it's not in the greatest state. And I don't know if you can hear that slight kind of like ticking noise. That is actually from faulty wiring in the ceiling. This is how badly treated this site is, which is honestly such a pain for a medievalist and a historian of any kind, because we're talking of one of the most important religious sites in the south of England. But like I said, it was completely forgotten, and even after the prison works started happening here, the local council didn't really put a lot of effort into preserving it, which is the current situation that we're dealing with. So there is a lovely group of whom I would make reference now. They are called, or at least their website is called Hyde 900, and you guys should totally visit it. It's online, because they also have a recreation, a 3D model of what the whole abbey would have looked like. But this group, Hyde 900, are actually a local community here in Winchester. Most of them are residents of this area of Winchester, and they are advocating for a better preservation of this, well, of at least the 2 buildings that we have left. They appreciate that we cannot bring the whole of the abbey back to life. Some of the neighbors may have a complaint with, their houses being removed for that purpose, but they are at least trying to maintain this building so that the pigeons don't cause any problems, so that there is no graffiti done in here, which we've had huge problems with over time. And that's things like, that ticking of the light and just any water damage to the roof, whatever, it's all preserved. This is also one of the reasons why they built this cage, so that some of these stones, I don't know if you can see, all of that, unfortunately, are bird feces. And for those of you who are not very well acquainted with archaeology, it's quite corrosive. So it doesn't help to the general preservation of the site, which is a real shame. So, I hope that if nothing else, guys, you realize that even if you're an incredibly important monument, if people are not aware of you and people are not actively campaigning to keep you running, you could end up like this. Now, one of the reasons why I want to stop here is so I can show you a map of how big the monastic compound would have been. So we thankfully have these panels, right? And as you can see, all of that white line would have been part of the abbey. So that is St. Bartholomew's Church. That's where we were just a moment ago. The wall would have gone even further from where the church is, and the gate is just there. And this isn't even part of the actual monastery community. This whole chunk that is missing is where the monks would have lived. So if you like, this would have been for the ordinary people, and that would have been for the monks themselves. Now, there is a reason for that, and I'm going to show you, because we're going to go to that area just now. which is the fact that the river is actually very close to that area where the monks would have originally set. And of course, for Benedictine communities and monasteries of any kind, being close to a source of water made their daily life very, very practical, because they could have not just access to clean water, but they could potentially aid in things like milling, anything to do with gardening, for which Benedictine monks were actually quite good at, and it was a very precious art. We think that part of this canal may have been part of the Abbey water supply. Unsure about it. We've done some digs around here, but it's actually quite difficult to put clarity into this thing, because on top of that, the funding given to these projects tends to be quite lacking. So this is the life of an archaeologist and a historian. I hate to say it, but I always speak very open and very plainly about it. A lot of people like romanticizing our profession, but a lot of the time it's actually quite bleak in that sense. So it's also good for you guys to understand that, unfortunately, as much as I would love to show you all of these beautiful things all in one place, this is the dark side of history. Now, this community that I was mentioning, Hyde 900, also have an associated project which decided to create some gardens here, which is where I'm taking you, to sort of mark that enclave where the monastic community was. And thanks to their very hard work, this is now sort of a protected area, and it's kept, it's clean, and it's constantly being looked after, which is super important, because even though we don't have the monastic unit itself, at least we have something. And one of the very beautiful things that they did recently with some of the funding from the charity was putting a panel that has an engraving of what the actual abbey would have looked like. So I'm just moving towards it so I can show you this engraving and roughly the size of what the abbey itself would have been. So this is what we call Hyde Abbey Garden, and this is where the actual community would have been set, or at least part of the ground. Now, this engraving that you see here tries to replicate the majestic interior of this abbey. I mean, look at those Romanesque columns, those ceilings, that height. It honestly would have been impressive. And yet, as you can see, there is nothing around it for you to know. Another wonderful thing that they did is mark 3 graves, completely anonymous and completely blank. So there's literally nothing underneath this. It's just markers, if you like, for the 3 important royal burials that we know are scattered at some point between here to where we've just been a moment ago. So there would have been one for King Alfred of Winchester, another one for his wife, Elfrida, or Elfrith, depending how you pronounce it, and for their son, Edward, who also became King of England and who was a very strong supporter of his father's original call for a burial place for him and his family here in Winchester, which eventually developed into our Hyde Abbey. And as you can see, it's a very lovely area that they've managed to put here. It goes all the way there. The shape roughly tries to recreate, I don't know if you can see it here on the floor very clearly, sort of follows like an apse kind of form, suggesting that maybe this is where the actual base for the monastic church would have been. But that's kind of everything that we have left. And that's kind of as far as I can read in this particular situation. Everything else that we know about the abbey itself is, well, all lost to history because of that dissolution of the monasteries didn't only just destroy the site itself, but it also destroyed a lot of the religious records, which is what people sometimes don't realize. It's not just the actual physical evidence, but the material evidence associated with it, such as charters, papers, whatever. There wouldn't have been a community here keeping an eye on them in Winchester, and the very sort of bits and pieces that we have are a bit fragmentary. So putting together the history of this place is rather complicated. Nonetheless, very much worthy, because this is literally the ultimate resting place of King Alfred of the West Saxons, the man that managed to start the unification of England and became the first proper English king, as to say. And the reason why we have English language, if you follow some of the mainstream ideas around King Alfred, we are not entirely sure whether he actually was able to properly speak and write accordingly, but he was a very good person to put forward ideas such as a library network here in England. From that library network and those scriptoriums in places like Hyde Abbey, there would have been huge volumes of illuminated manuscripts being produced, and the development of the English language would have slowly come through that way. So with such an amazing king being somewhere, somewhere there in the ground, we really should be able to at least visit these places and acknowledge the impact that he had in the world. And that's pretty much all I can show you of Hyde Abbey without making further use of technology. Like I said, the model that Hyde 900 have of it 3D is really cool if you want to really gauge what a Benedictine Abbey would have looked like. And they have a few more resources because as they are community driven, then everyone sort of chips in. But at the end of the day, they can only do as much as they can. They don't have the funding of an entire university or government to do it. So it's still very much restricted to what the local community can do. And that's that. I hope that makes some sense.
That was fantastic, Lily. Thank you so much for this tour. It's been wonderful to learn about all the hidden gems really contained in such a larger area than perhaps some were expecting, but it's still in very walkable distance. So much to see.
I mean, just generally because I've kind of come to the end, but I haven't shown you what we've walked from. I'll turn the camera around again just so you guys can see. So we are now here on the graves, and let me just walk to the edge, and you will just be able to see Hyde Gate. Right. So if I stand here, because the light is changing, so it may be a bit foggy in the distance, but you see that sort of pointed A-frame right there? That's the gate. So if you put all of that together and the church just a little bit farther there, it's an entire neighborhood, which is rather significant if you think about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is, just such an interesting and rich part of English history that would be quite easily overlooked if you were just walking through. And thank you for also shining a light on the community efforts to restore it and the importance of that in preserving ancient sites. Personally, as an archaeologist myself as well, it's fantastic to be able to. It's also slightly heartbreaking that there's not enough funding from the government, but it is great to see that there's always people passionate and interested in supporting the local community. I have a feeling, I've just got one quick question for you. I have a feeling I may know your answer, but if in a world that time machines existed and you could travel back to see Hyde Abbey in all its glory, is there a part of it, the one part that really sticks out the most that you'd love to see first?
The cloister. For me, it will be the cloister, but purely because I love monastic cloisters. I'm just nuts for them. As someone who has a very solid background in medieval architecture, I've always found cloisters fascinating because they are such serene spaces, and you have the beauty of archaeology and architecture together with nature. A lot of the time, they can be gardens or fountain spaces, and it really shows that medieval life really did relish in these little things that are very similar to our everyday life. And I think it's really important to pay attention to these spaces, because then we can be a lot more appreciative of that continuity element that we sometimes tend to forget. Like, it's not like it really sort of breaks my heart when people think like we jump from being Romans and suddenly medieval to suddenly modern. It doesn't happen like that. There is always a continuum. And I in fact tend to say, humans are actually rather basic. We haven't evolved that much throughout time. We have the same needs, the same desires. And at the end of the day, our structures are very much the same. We've just kind of improved them thanks to the technology that we've developed, but it's kind of the same thing. So standing in a monastic cloister, it's kind of like standing in your own garden, but better.
I really couldn't have asked for a better answer than that. That was brilliant and an incredibly poignant look on really the more things change, the more things also stay the same. This cloister and all that, it's just absolutely wonderful. I have no further questions. I think this has been an absolutely enlightening trip from this little slice of Winchester. Thank you so much. This has been incredible. Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
No, well, other than that, really, honestly, guys, anyone who's listening to this or that sees this later, do mind some attention to your local heritage, because no matter how big or small the history around you is, it's worth preserving. It's super important, and it's super important that you remember it is there, because if all it takes is one person to start forgetting, and then it just starts fading into the background, and that's how we can end up with situations like this. But particularly in this day and age where there is constant funding struggles for humanities, and particularly, well, ancient studies, medieval. I mean, in the UK, we've had the closure of two of the largest archaeology departments. When during the pandemic, archaeologists have been busiest than ever before. It's super important that you contribute to your local heritage, even if it's just by visiting and being aware of it, because by doing that, you're genuinely allowing sites like that to continue and to move on. So you don't have to go very far to actually enjoy a bit of history that is worth saving and worth paying attention to. Doesn't matter if you're in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, in Zimbabwe. Doesn't matter. Just honestly engage with your local heritage, and your life will be better for it, and the heritage will be there in 2 generations' time as well.
That is such an important message, and thank you so much for making it. I could not agree more. The heritage around the world, wherever it is, the little contributions we make can be so meaningful. Thank you so much for your talk today, Lily, and for partnering Travolution with us at SASA. For those who've enjoyed this, I know I certainly have. We have another tour on Wednesday evening, and then another one a fortnight, 2 weeks from that Wednesday. And I'm very much looking forward to them, especially given how wonderful this was. We'd love to see all of you there. And thank you so much, Lily, for this wonderful tour, and for everyone at home taking part and watching along. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. It's honestly my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.